Welcome, everybody, to a new edition of Inside Boxing Weekly. This is your host for tonight and generally co-host, Jeremiah J. Preisser. Unfortunately, Mike cannot be on tonight, but we're just going to move forward with the process anyways. And as always, I want to thank all of our listeners for tuning in and week out. It's very much appreciated. I thank anybody who would want to tune in every time to listen to me talk to boxing. So again, thank you very much. Tonight's topic, of course, is going to be last week's fight, Jorge Linares versus Anthony Crolla at the Manchester Arena in Manchester, United Kingdom. We're also going to talk about Katie Taylor versus Melina Koliva, and then we're going to preview some of the upcoming fights this weekend. Unfortunately, there's not much going on, but as always, I mean, there's always something to talk about, and for those who pay attention to the sport, especially the hardcore fans, there's always something to be interested about. So on to last week's fights. We had Katie Taylor taking on Melina Koliva in an 8-round contest. For anybody who saw the fight, I think there's a general impression around Katie Taylor that she's an excellent fighter. And her Olympic background surely shows. She's got sharp combinations, quick hands, and I honestly think that if they gave women 3 rounds, 3-minute rounds like they do the men, I'm in agreement with her that there would probably be more stoppages, ergo there would be more people paying attention. But besides all that, Katie Taylor continues to move on and move up. She looked excellent, landed a lot of combinations, controlled the distance well. She was just too good for the girl. And it seems as if Eddie Hearn is already planning for her to get a title shot here, maybe in the near future, and by near future I mean this year. Katie Taylor already looks ready for it. In men's boxing, it's hard to say somebody, unless you have the skill set of a guy like Vasil Lomachenko. It's very rare that you see somebody make headway so fast. But Katie Taylor is surely there. She's ready for the best in her division. And she's gathering a lot of interest. I mean, not only because of her style, but it's certainly a question. Could she beat? My guess is that they're targeting Delphine Person, who is a 39-fight veteran from Belgium, solid fighter. You don't hear much about her, but she's had a long reign. I mean, she's stuck in Belgium, and that's probably why. But in all likelihood, it's probably like Heather Hardy told us in an interview not long ago, that she gets paid well, they respect her more, and if you have to, you have to go over there to travel and take on the champion. I'm not sure if Eddie Hearn is going to be able to work out the details and maybe lure Person into Ireland, or maybe they'll accept a fight on Person's home soil. It's hard to say. But all I know, and all I think a lot of people are aware of, is that Katie Taylor is ready right now. So kudos to her for a fantastic performance again. She's certainly moving on to bigger and better things. And to go from there, we move on to Jorge Linares versus Anthony Crolla. Now, it was an anticipated rematch. It wasn't highly sought after by a lot of hardcore boxing fans, not because it's not an interesting fight per se, but because Jorge Linares is generally viewed as the better fighter going in, and he certainly proved that he was in the rematch. Anybody who saw the fight, it's hard not to be in awe of Jorge Linares' ability. He's such a fluid boxer. His combinations are fantastic. He's got great hand speed. His power is good, as we saw in the 7th round when he slipped that punch and threw a fantastic left uppercut that dropped Crolla. Certainly had him on wobbly legs. He went in for the kill, but I don't think he pressed the action as much as he could have. But besides all that, Jorge Linares turned in a fantastic performance. I mean, he's the kind of guy that I've liked for many, many years, ever since he was a featherweight. I wasn't quite to Max Kellerman's point where he almost viewed him as an all-time great before he really put in the work to get there. But I was certainly on board with him being one of the most naturally gifted men in the sport, and I think he's shown that time in and time again. Unfortunately, his chin is not great, and his papier-mâché skin. And he's had some tough setbacks because of it. You take the Antonio DeMarco fight, which he was winning, a nice war, but he was clearly outboxing DeMarco, and unfortunately he gets stopped. He suffered a couple stoppage losses as well, but that doesn't take away from the fact that he's a fantastic talent. I mean, he's 30 years old now, and he's been in the game for many, many years. I mean, a lot of people probably aren't aware of how long he's actually been doing it. I just think he's garnered this spotlight a little bit more now that he's the lightweight champion of the world. I want to stress that because, the WBC, WBA belts, all the trinket stuff, it really doesn't matter to me. I focus more on who, be the best beating the best in the Lineal/Linear championships. And Jorge Linares, to his credit, has been able to obtain that with the Ring magazine by beating Crolla, who was rated, I believe, number 3rd going into their first fight. But yes, it was fantastic for the Golden Boy. I think a lot of us are anticipating, what's next for him. I mean, he looked very sharp. He was on top of his game and probably put in quite possibly the best performance of his career. And that's saying something. I mean, Linares hasn't proven an all-time great, but if you go back, if you followed him as long as I have, you've seen him put on some fantastic performances in the past. For instance, Rocky Juarez. That fight really made me, I don't want to say fall in love with Linares, but it certainly did a lot to raise his stock, in my opinion. It's hard to find good tape on that fight, but he outboxed Juarez, I think, in even clearer fashion than he did Crolla. He's working the uppercuts really nicely, his hand speed, his jab, everything was going. And, you look at the guy and you think to yourself that he's one of the best fighters in the sport, barring, again, the chin and the skin. But now that he holds some, WBC trinkets that, nobody should really care about except the WBC. But the point is that Mikey Garcia is the WBC title holder. So what that makes is it makes Jorge Linares and Mikey Garcia on a collision course with one another, and I think a lot of people would really like to see that fight happen. I think it's also obtainable. I mean, you have Golden Boy, and then you have, Mikey Garcia, and I think so long as we see it time and time again, no matter how impossible the odds seem, if promoters want to work with each other and get it done in the name of money, then it will get done. I expect that if, they want Garcia and Linares to get done, it will. I think, like most people, I would probably favor, Garcia in that instance. In terms of talent, there's not much to split between them, but it just seems as if, Garcia's power would be a bit too much for Linares, who, again, hasn't shown the best chin. But then again, it should be noted that, Mikey Garcia hasn't shown the best chin as well. He has been hurt a number of times, and by smaller fighters. I think Linares has enough pop to hurt him. He has enough talent to upset him, but the betting favorites, and I think rightfully so, would be Mikey Garcia. And I think that makes sense. But the whole point is for it to happen, and that would be a fantastic fight at lightweight. Promoters, I hope you're listening. Make it happen. And moving on to this coming week's fight, because again there wasn't much to speak of in last week's, is we have Antonio Orozco versus Keandra Gibson in a 140-pound fight in 10 rounds, and this is going to be in Las Vegas on ESPN's debut for ESPN. ESPN and Golden Boy made a contract with one another, and Golden Boy is going to be seeing a lot of attention, especially on the West Coast, with their cards. They've been doing a lot of great stuff in California, putting on a lot of good local cards, making use of the hotbed of Latin talent that it is. And this is going to be, their showcase. This is going to be their introduction to the ESPN arena. This is good exposure not only for Golden Boy but for boxing. We're all just hoping that, Golden Boy keeps making competitive fights so we can all tune in from time to time, because really that's what it's about. I mean, you have all this promotional bickering, the PBC, K2, Bob Arum, on and on and on. We the fans don't really care about that. We don't want to indulge in politics. We don't want our promoters to do that either. We just want to see the best of the best. And if there's one thing that the UFC is doing right, whether you like it or not, it's that you can expect the best to fight the best. You know that there's one champion per division. You know that his number one challenger is going to get a fight sometime in the future. This fight, Antonio Orozco versus Keandre Gibson, is an interesting one because they're both up-and-coming talents. Orozco is undefeated. Gibson is also undefeated. Neither one are big bangers. Orozco looks like he has a bit more pop. He also has a bit more experience. And my guess is that Orozco is going to be the favorite here, and rightfully so. The card also features Mercedo Gesta, a good Filipino fighter against Gilberto Gonzalez, Joet Gonzalez versus Derek Murray, Emilio Sanchez versus Jose Bustos, Cesar Diaz versus Felipe Rivas, and Edgar Valerio versus Har Quintero. It's a solid card from top to bottom. Just be sure to tune in. Even if the names on the card are not particularly interesting to you, if there's one thing that you can do as a boxing fan, it's you can tune in. It's in a way, it's like a democracy. Watching a program is putting your vote in. So please at least give the recognition that this card deserves. Tune in and help people out. Moving on to it certainly is the most important fight for the weekend, and it's one that's not going to get a lot of attention in the United States, which I think is a bit unfortunate because I think the cruiserweight division is undervalued. I personally am a big fan. Americans haven't really seemed to caught on, and that's because we haven't had many good American cruiserweights of late. It's been dominated by the Europeans, and this fight kind of accentuates that point. And it's Maris Briedis versus Marco Huck, and it's been upgraded to a title fight because Bellew, for some very odd reason, well, it's not so odd. If you understand boxing and the way the alphabet soup organizations work, guys get stripped, guys get appointed all sorts of odd titles at times. I mean, going back to the Jorge Linares thing, he was the WBC title holder. Well, the WBC decided to strip him, I don't know, due to inactivity. He had a brief injury. I can't quite remember what it was, but he wasn't out of the ring for very long, but they still decided to strip him and then, try to console him with, oh, you're the diamond champion. Well, to me, that's a bunch of bull. But, the WBC, even though they're often viewed as the best alphabet soup organization out there, I'm not a fan of any of them, to be honest with you. And the WBC, for this, it just highlights why I'm not. I mean, this has been upgraded to a WBC cruiserweight fight. And again, this is all stripping Tony Bellew, who had one fight at heavyweight against David Haye. If Tony Bellew had committed and said, I'm going to be a heavyweight from now on, yeah, that would make some sense to me. But I haven't heard any news stating that Tony Bellew plans on staying at heavyweight. Maybe he does. I mean, but I haven't heard any negotiations. I haven't heard any dialogue between Tony Bellew and the WBC itself. But if I'm not mistaken, they did like they did Jorge Linares in this instance, where they're calling Tony Bellew champion emeritus, or one of the many titles that, champion in recess, interim champion, yada, yada, yada. The title means nothing. Again, it's just a way for the alphabet organizations to keep doing what they're doing. I mean, keep charging fees to fighters, to fight for some, piece of plastic. It is what it is. I'm not really focused on, I don't want to focus too much on the title because the fight itself is actually very interesting. Briedis is a prospect that a lot of people, especially in Europe, think pretty highly of. I mean, he's 21-0, has 18 knockouts, and he's from Latvia, which isn't a hotbed of talent. But he looks, to be bucking the trend there. I mean, he's had some really good performances, especially in his last outing. I mean, you see clear progression there. His knockout of Manuel Charr was worth watching. If you have time, go to YouTube or whatever it is, whatever video streamer that you use, check that knockout out. It was certainly something to see. I mean, because Briedis fighting at heavyweight, which isn't his normal, that isn't the normal range that he's in. He fought Manuel Charr, who was 245 pounds. So Briedis was 213, Charr was 245, and Briedis knocked him clean out. It was a lovely uppercut that did the trick. Charr fell into the ropes and was out cold. Again, go do yourself a favor and watch that. He also looked good against Venter. Looks good against Durandola, who I believe is the recent conqueror, and just announced that he was going to be in a rematch with Dimitri Kadri. He dominated Durandola, knocked him out in the ninth. Looked good in his last performance. So I expect this fight. Marco Huck was at one time considered the best cruiserweight in the world, until, of course, Krzysztof Glowacki knocked him off his perch, and a great fight on PBC. Now Huck has been kind of getting back into the groove of things, working his way back into contention, and now we get this, a big, a really nice cruiserweight showdown between two good European fighters. It's worth a watch. I mean, because Huck is not a great puncher, but he is a good puncher, and he's got a lot of experience, and it's going to show us where Briedis really is, what kind of level he's on. He's looked to be world-class so far, but, I mean, anybody who's familiar with boxing, has been following a long time, there are a lot of guys who look the part and end up falling short. And, again, worth checking out if you have, an hour or so. Tune in. I'm sure you can find a stream somewhere. There are lots of them around the internet floating about. So since there is not much to talk about besides, Briedis and Huck and last week's fights, we'll move on to some boxing news. And I apologize for the throat clearing here. I'm feeling a little bit. But it said, but of course, Boxing Scene, one of the premier boxing news websites. There's been an announcement that Mikkel Kessler is coming back for the World Boxing Super Series. And if, a lot of you, if you've been following boxing for a while, Kessler's now 38 years old. But he announced his retirement in 2015. But he had just a top-notch fighter. One who could beat, very good fighters, but never the great ones. He couldn't quite make that jump, over Calzaghe. He couldn't quite do it against Ward. But he was one of my favorite guys during his era. I mean, he had a real nice jab, good hand speed, just well-rounded fighter, good power. I remember when he put it on Librado Andrada. That was one of the highlight performances of his career. Of course, the fights with Froch were well worth a watch as well. But he is coming back, for the World Boxing Super Series, which has been put together by former Golden Boy, Richard Schaefer, Golden Boy employee Richard Schaefer, where there's a prize of $50 million and a Muhammad Ali trophy. I'm not quite sure where Kessler fits in. I mean, again, at 30 years old and with that amount of inactivity, it's hard to say just what he has left. But if he has I would say if he has 75%, 80% of what he used to have, his shot isn't that bad. And the reason I say that is because if he if he comes back as a light heavyweight, then his chances are slim. But if there's a tournament for the super middleweights, 168, then I don't think his chances are all that bad personally. And the reason I say that is because 168 isn't particularly deep at the moment, but Jack is likely going to leave. Even though a lot of people are clamoring for the rematch with DeGale, it just doesn't look like Jack is going to stay. Maybe he just can't make the weight or what have you. So with Jack leaving, you have a thinner division and one kind of lacking in a dominant figure. Gilberto Ramirez, he looks good so far. He had a damn good performance in his last outing against Arthur Abraham, but then again, we must acknowledge that Abraham was old. Abraham has been around the block, many times, and he's also, stuck it out in Germany for a long time against decent opposition. So it wasn't a big surprise that Ramirez was able to outbox him, especially, because Abraham likes to put the earmuffs on, come at you. And so, granted, you work a little bit harder than he does. It's not terribly hard to earn a decision. Again, I'm not trying to knock the guy. He is a good fighter, and he's been around and been at the top level for a long time. But we've seen all you got to do is take a look at his resume, and it's clear to see that he wasn't the kind of guy who could hang with the very best. So again, we have Gilberto Ramirez, who's a good fighter, good young fighter. Is he a dominant figure? He hasn't shown it, right? I mean, I saw him fight Maxim Vlasov live, and he looked good, but did he look like he was going to take over? No. And then you have George Groves, who is in the running as well. He's experienced a bit of a comeback after suffering a couple defeats. I think Groves is a player, but clearly he's not a dominant figure. James DeGale, not a dominant figure. Chris Eubank Jr., if he decides to stay there, not a dominant figure. Callum Smith, that's yet to be seen. He's a young guy. I like his style. He goes to the body well, good power, good hand speed. Again, it's time will tell with him, but he's on the verge of getting it. If I'm not mistaken, he's fighting Anthony Durrell in the not too distant future for a trinket. I'm not really sure of that. And then you have Andre Durrell, who's also in the mix. But of course, like Andre Durrell, he's always experienced spurts of inactivity, and I haven't heard anything from him in recent years. I mean, not recent years, in recent months. So again, I can't expect Andre Durrell to be a major player. So you look at the landscape there. You look at the top 10, and you ask yourself, if Mikkel Kessler is, again, 70, 75, 80% of what he was in his prime, you got to figure that his odds they're not awful. But again, we'll only be able to tell once he gets in the ring. That's going to be hard, some hard ring rust to shake off. But if he gets active soon and gets in shape, I don't know, maybe he'll be able to beat off some of it. But again, it's just hard to tell. I hope Kessler is in good condition, and I hope he's got some of the stuff that he had, because he's a good guy and he's a good fighter, and he's not the kind of guy I want to see hurt. So we'll move on to other news. Of course, a lot of people are anticipating the Golovkin-Billy Joe Saunders showdown. It seems as if negotiations are in the process. We're all still waiting word on that. I'm personally a fan of the fight, not because I think Saunders is going to pose some big challenge to Golovkin, but I think it's a good stay busy fight. And I know a lot of modern fans may find that a weird concept, that a title unification fight can be labeled a stay busy fight, but the truth is that not many people think Saunders has much of a chance against Golovkin. And I know the same was said with Jacobs, but I think we look at Jacobs' skill set and his size, and we can't really look at Billy Joe Saunders and apply that there, can we? No. Saunders, he's got decent power, but he doesn't have enough to get Golovkin's respect. I don't think he's quick enough to, I don't think he's quicker than Jacobs. I don't think he has the size. I don't think he has the foot speed. He's defensively sound, and I think he's one of the better defenders in boxing, especially in the middleweight division. He's well-schooled, and I've liked watching him ever since he came up. He's knocked off a lot of undefeated guys, most notably Chris Eubank Jr., but he just doesn't have what it takes to defeat a guy like Gennady Golovkin. And, again, I don't really care about the trinkets, but a lot of these fighters do. So you have a Golovkin going into the fight, and, he wins the WBO belt, and that means he has all of the belts, all of the Alphabet Soup Organization belts, going into a fight with Canelo. That's the fight that we want. That's the fight we're hoping for. I hope we're all expecting that it'll be in the stadium too, Dallas Stadium, because the tickets will be a bit cheaper. But what you would have is a Golovkin wearing all 4 of the Alphabet Soup belts going into the match against the guy who holds the only belt that really matters, the Lineal Championship. That would be Canelo Alvarez, of course. So you'd have, and doesn't that show what a farce modern boxing is? You have one guy holding all of the Alphabet Soup trinkets, and you have one guy holding a belt given to him by, the Ring magazine. So Golovkin's, all that silver and leather that he's wearing, it's shiny and it looks nice, but again, Canelo Alvarez holds the middleweight championship of the world until he's stripped. I know a lot of people are like, how can he be the middleweight champion of the world if he, went down to 154? Well, unfortunately, you're not barred from fighting in other weight classes if you're a champion. That's well within your domain, and I think it should be. I mean, if you want to venture out, if Golovkin, for instance, went up to 168, and let's imagine that he was the Lineal or Linear middleweight champion of the world, and he went up to 168 to fight Gilberto Ramirez. Golovkin is clearly a natural middleweight, so I don't think anybody's going to dock him for moving up to 168, to fight Gilberto Ramirez if it makes financial sense, especially if he plans on moving back down. Granted, Canelo and Golden Boy, which seems like a big if anymore, doesn't it? If they hold their end of the bargain, we'll have Golovkin versus Canelo in the fall. So you have Golovkin beating the second-rated middleweight in Danny Jacobs. A close fight, admittedly. I don't want to get into the controversy there, but you have Golovkin beating the number 2 middleweight in the world, and then he's beating the number 3 middleweight in the world after that, and then imagine he beats Canelo Alvarez. I mean, wouldn't that be a Fighter of the Year type year? That would be. I mean, I'm not putting it in. I'm not applying any legendary context to this. But for a modern middleweight, when is the last time that we've seen something like that? When is the last time we've seen a highly rated middleweight, the number 1 rated middleweight in the world, or even a middleweight champion? When is the last time we've seen him not only fight 3 times in 1 year, but take on that sort of competition? I think we should really, pay heed to that and give Golovkin a lot of credit, because now that he's a name and he's become almost unavoidable, so now he's finally getting the fights that he's deserved. Unfortunately, he's a little long in the tooth, so he's probably not going to last much longer. But again, I'm happy for him. Everybody else should be happy for him, and let's just make the fights that the people want. Golden Boy, please get on board. I know K2 certainly is. All right. So let's talk about something else, okay? And this is just something that I would like to point out, and I mentioned it earlier in the show. Dimitri Kadri versus Duradola. It's the rematch. It's going to be for a WBC fight, eliminator. These things just kind of pop up out of nowhere. These eliminators. Well, hell, title fights themselves pop up out of nowhere. But it's a WBC eliminator. I was hoping that Tony Bellew would remain the WBC's title holder, because I think Kudryashov can come out on top in this rematch. If you watch the first fight, Kudryashov was winning. He had Durandola reeling. he had him reeling. Unfortunately, he got a little. He just got a little carried away and opened himself up, ended up getting caught, and ended up getting stopped. If Kudryashov keeps his stuff together this time, I don't see any reason why he can't win the fight. Again, he was winning clearly, not long before the point of stoppage. He's a guy that I like. Unfortunately, he's like a lot of Eastern European fighters or fighters from the Eastern Bloc, former Soviet bloc, where they start late, and it's just unfortunate because we don't get to see a lot of these guys in their prime for very long. Even guys like Vasyl Lomachenko, who are already 29 years old. Anyways, Kudryashov is one. He's worth watching. He just has an exciting style. He doesn't really get in there and he's not like a Gotti type fighter or Ward type fighter where he'll put his chin in the air and get dirty, but he's a huge puncher, certainly one of the biggest in the sport. I would liken him to a cruiserweight version of Kovalev, and again, just in power, not in skills. He does rely on the straight punches, much like Kovalev does. Where he likes to jab and he likes to throw the right hand, but he mixes it up a bit. Unfortunately, his work rate hurts him. He's too patient in his approach. But in his last fight, he let his hands go a bit more, and he looked a bit better. So I'm hoping he maintains that approach and takes this victory, because if he wins, then it's also relevant to the Huck Bradis fight, and Kudryashov would get one of those guys. Again, I was hoping he would get Bellew, because I think Bellew versus Kudryashov is very interesting. Kudryashov, again, he's not an active fighter, but he is a massive banger, and him versus Bellew would just, I think they would be fireworks, because Bellew would have to pay respect to Kudryashov's power. Moving on to other news, and I don't want to drag this out too much further because, again, it's kind of a slow week. It's going to pick up soon. Lomachenko versus Sosa is not far off, and we are all very excited about that, I think. Anytime you get to watch Vasyl Lomachenko perform in the ring I've had the pleasure of seeing him twice in person, one in his debut, again, that fight is around the corner, and it also looks as if Luis Ortiz signed with Al Heyman, and his first opponent is likely Derek Rossi, and that isn't anything really to write home about. It's not that intriguing of a heavyweight matchup, but Rossi's a solid journeyman. He's been around for a while. Stavern went life and death with him not too long ago. I believe it was a split decision in Stavern's favor. So again, he's a solid journeyman. He's been around. He's fought a lot of opponents. But what I like about it is this opens the door for Luis Ortiz versus Deontay Wilder. That's what I like most about it, because a lot of people were pretty high on Luis Ortiz. He's a Cuban southpaw. He's got good boxing skills. He's been kind of flat in his most recent performances, and that very well could be a product of age. He's not young. Most of these guys are not young. So we're hoping that Deontay Wilder is around the corner. I'm not sure what's lined up for Deontay Wilder at the moment, but if Luis Ortiz is doing the right thing and he's staying active, and hopefully he gets a shot soon, that would be a title fight worth tuning in for. Deontay Wilder, to his credit, he's an exciting fighter to watch. Clearly he's got a good number of fundamental issues that he needs to work on. I'm not sure how much those are going to be ironed out anymore, because it's he looks as if he's already peaked. How good he really is still hard to tell. He's raw still. He gets a bit careless, and against a sharp boxer like Luis Ortiz who plods. The thing is, Deontay Wilder he's tall, but he's also fairly nimble for his size, and I don't want to exaggerate the nimble part. I mean, I don't want to make him sound like he's Ali or something. I just mean in terms of when you compare him to Luis Ortiz. Ortiz is very flat-footed. He plods forward. He understands the concept of cutting off the ring. He's just not very good at it. So that's the intrigue there. And I'm hoping, again, that fight comes off. And that is all for any serious boxing news that I want to talk about tonight. So again, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Once again, you can find all of the gruelingtruth.net stuff on Spreaker, Stitcher, iTunes, iHeart, wherever you can find podcasts. You can find this show. You can find some of our other shows. I mean, we opine on a wide variety of topics: baseball, football, MMA. It's not, we don't encompass all sports, but we encompass a lot. There's a lot of interesting stuff, a lot of many interesting guests on a lot of these. And if you're interested in that, we've interviewed a wide number of interesting guests in our past: Lamont Peterson, Rishi Warren, Jeff Horn, who it's looking as if he's going to get the Manny Pacquiao fight. I'd love to have Horn back on. So again, check us out, check the website out, and for Jeremiah Preisser and the gruelingtruth.net, good night and farewell.